The night sky above the Pacific Ocean had always been beautiful. People would stand on the beaches of California and Hawaii and look up at the stars and feel small. They had always felt small. But on the evening of March 14th, 2187, the sky stopped being beautiful. It became something else. It became a warning. It started with a shadow. The shadow was not from a cloud. It was not from a storm. It was from something far, far bigger. From the coast of San Francisco, people looked up and saw it first. A darkness that spread across the stars like ink dropping into water. Streetlights began to flicker. Car engines died. Phones went black. And then slowly, a massive shape lowered itself from the upper atmosphere, so large that it blocked out the moon entirely. It was a ship, but calling it a ship was like calling the ocean a puddle. It was a fleet. 1,400 warships, hanging in the sky like a second ceiling over the earth. Each vessel was bigger than any aircraft carrier humanity had ever built. Some were bigger than small cities. They moved in silence, and that silence was the most frightening thing of all. Within minutes, every screen on Earth lit back up. Every television, every computer, every phone, all of them turned on by themselves. And on every screen, in every language spoken by every human being on the planet, the same message played. People of Earth, you are addressed by the Vreth Dominion. We have watched your world for 43 of your years. We have studied your species. We have measured your weapons. We have calculated your strength. You are outmatched. You are outgunned. You are outpaced. Resistance is not a strategy. It is a death sentence. The voice was calm and flat. It had no feeling in it, like a machine reading numbers aloud. You have 72 hours. Surrender all military equipment, all governing bodies, and all territorial claims. Open your cities. Accept our administration. Those who cooperate will be processed efficiently. Those who do not will be removed. This is not a negotiation. This is a courtesy. Then the screens went dark again. For a moment, the whole world was silent. Then it was not. The UN Emergency Council convened within the hour. Representatives from every nation joined the call from wherever they were, some in offices, some in cars, some still in their pajamas. The faces on the screens ranged from pale with shock to red with anger. Nobody was calm. Nobody had a plan, and the clock had already started. General Marcus Webb, the United States Joint Chief of Staff, pulled up the numbers. He was a big man, a quiet man, the kind of person who had spent 30 years not panicking so that others could. But even he had to take a breath before he spoke. We have 83 active warships capable of space combat, he said. They have 1,400. We have 12 orbital defense platforms. They have weapons that our analysts have never seen before. Every simulation our computers have run in the past 40 minutes ends the same way. A representative from Brazil asked the obvious question, how does it end? Earth loses, Webb said, every time, in under 4 hours. The room went quiet again. Outside the windows of every Capitol building in the world, crowds had already gathered. Some were praying, some were protesting, some were just standing together, because standing together felt better than standing alone. It was the Secretary General, a calm and careful woman named Dr. Priya Okafor, who eventually spoke the words that everyone else had been avoiding. Then we do not fight with weapons, she said. We fight with something else. Everyone turned to her. We send an envoy, she said. Someone who does not go up there to surrender. Someone who goes up there to talk, and to listen, and to think. There was an argument, of course. There was always an argument. Some wanted to fire everything they had and go down in flames rather than give up. Some wanted to send diplomats with white flags. Some wanted to do nothing, and hope the Vreth were bluffing. But after 2 hours of shouting and silence and more shouting, one name kept coming up. One name that people trusted when there was no good option left. Commander Alara Voss. She was not the most famous soldier in the human fleet. She was not the biggest or the loudest or the most decorated. She was 41 years old, medium height, with short dark hair and brown eyes that people said never looked surprised by anything. She had ended the Mars revolt 4 years ago without firing a single shot. Not by luck, but by understanding exactly what the other side was afraid of, and using that knowledge with precision. She had studied conflict theory, alien linguistics, behavioral psychology, and military strategy. She slept 4 hours a night, and read everything she could find. When the call came, she was already awake. She had been watching the ships on her laptop, from her small apartment in Geneva, a cup of cold tea sitting forgotten beside her. She listened to the Secretary General. She asked 3 questions. She got 3 answers. Then she was quiet for a moment. "All right," she said. "I will go." Someone on the call asked if she was afraid. "Of course," she said. "But fear is just information. You listen to it, and then you decide what to do with it." There was a pause. "What are you going to do up there?" the general asked. She picked up her cold tea, took a sip, and set it back down. "I'm not going up there to surrender," she said. "I'm going up there to negotiate their retreat." Nobody laughed, not because it was a bad joke, but because the way she said it made them think, just for a second, that she might actually mean it. The shuttle was ready in 3 hours. Elara packed light, a change of clothes, a datapad full of files she had been quietly building for 6 months, ever since the first signs of alien observation had been detected by deep space listening stations. Notes, numbers, plans inside plans. She walked across the launch pad, in the gray early morning, the shadow of the alien fleet still stretching across the sky above her, blotting out the sunrise. A young technician held the door of the shuttle open for her. He looked like he hadn't slept. His hands were shaking slightly. "Commander," he said, "good luck." She gave him a small nod, not a smile exactly, something calmer than a smile. "Thank you," she said. "Keep the lights on down here." Then she stepped inside, and the door closed, and the shuttle lifted up into the dark. The shuttle felt very small inside the shadow of the Vreth flagship. Elara sat in the front seat, looking out through the narrow window as the massive ship grew larger and larger. From a distance it had looked like a piece of darkness. Up close, it had detail. Long ridges running along its hull like the ribs of some enormous animal. Glowing panels of orange light set into the metal at regular intervals, and surface guns as big as skyscrapers pointing in every direction. It was built to look unstoppable. Elara noted that too. Ships built to look unstoppable were usually built that way for a reason, because someone, somewhere, had needed to be convinced. She opened her datapad and reviewed her notes one more time. She had been gathering this information quietly for half a year, pulling pieces from deep space listening stations, from intercepted signal patterns, from alien behavior studies that most people in the military hadn't even known existed. She had read everything. She had slept very little. And now, as the shuttle docked and the metal door of the flagship opened ahead of her, she closed the datapad and put it away. She stepped inside. The inside of the Vreth flagship was designed to make visitors feel small. The ceilings were high, impossibly high, stretching up into dimness like the inside of a cathedral, but colder and darker. The walls were covered in displays showing maps of conquered star systems, looping footage of destroyed cities on other worlds, and long lists of species names followed by single words in the Vreth script that her translator quietly rendered as absorbed and eliminated and dissolved. There were trophies everywhere, pieces of broken spacecraft, sealed containers holding artifacts from civilizations that no longer existed, mounted weapons that belonged to species that had once thought they could fight back. The 2 Vreth soldiers escorting her said nothing. They walked quickly, their forelegs moving in the smooth mechanical rhythm that Elara had studied on the surveillance footage. They were tall, nearly 8 feet, with smooth gray skin and eyes that were wide and flat and yellow. They wore armor that was partially grown into their bodies, which meant removing it would hurt. Another thing she noted. She walked slowly enough to look at everything, not because she was afraid, though she was, a little, always, that was just good sense, but because everything she saw was data. The angle of the surveillance cameras, the spacing of the doors, the hum of the power systems in the walls, the fact that the junior soldiers they passed in the corridors kept their eyes down when her escort walked by. That last detail was interesting. Fear ran downward in this hierarchy. The lower ranks were afraid of the upper ranks. That meant the upper ranks ruled through fear. Which meant, and this was important, they would not understand something that did not fear them. They brought her to the War Council chamber. It was enormous, circular, with a domed ceiling covered in star maps that shifted slowly like a living sky. Around the outer edge of the room stood Vreth officers, perhaps 30 of them, all watching her with the flat, patient attention of creatures who had done this before and knew how it ended. At the center, behind a long curved table, sat Kar Zethul. His skin was darker gray, almost black, and he had 8 limbs rather than 4. The extra 4 were folded against his torso, which marked him as a high commander in the Vreth hierarchy. He had a long, flat face with a wide mouth that showed no teeth when it was closed. His eyes were pale gold, and they fixed on Alara with the calm interest of someone looking at an insect they had not yet decided to crush. He let her stand in silence for a full minute before he spoke. That was a dominance gesture. She had read about it. "Human Envoy," he said, and the translator in her ear rendered his deep, clicking speech into clear English. "You are small." "We often are," Alara said pleasantly. "Your fleet is small." "It is. Your weapons are primitive." "By your standards, yes." He tilted his enormous head. He had been expecting fear, or flattery, or desperate argument. Plain agreement was not what he was used to. "Then you understand your position." "Completely," she said. "That's why I wanted to talk with you directly." He spread 2 of his upper arms in a gesture her translator tagged as amusement. "You were sent to beg." "I was sent to inform," Alara said. "There is a difference." Kar Zethul leaned back slightly. Around the room, the other officers exchanged looks. The human was not behaving correctly. Humans were supposed to be afraid. This one was standing in the center of the room, with her hands clasped loosely in front of her, looking around at the chamber, as if she were evaluating a house she was considering buying. "We have reviewed your military capacity," Kar Zethul said. 83 ships, 12 orbital platforms, outdated propulsion, limited energy weapons. You cannot fight us. Then, speak your terms of surrender, and we will process them. Alara looked at him for a moment. Then, slowly, she smiled. Not a nervous smile, not a polite smile. A calm, wide, deeply settled smile. The kind of smile that meant the person wearing it knew something you did not. "I'm not here to surrender," she said. "I'm here to give you a chance." The room shifted. It was subtle, a tightening of postures, a slight change in the quality of the silence. Kar Zethul's pale gold eyes narrowed just slightly. "A chance," he repeated. "To leave," she said, "peacefully, with your fleet intact and your people safe. I think that's a reasonable offer, and I want to be honest with you before the situation changes." Someone near the wall made a sound that the translator identified as a laugh. Kar Zethul did not laugh. He studied her with the eyes of someone trying to find the trick. "You gave us 3 days to surrender," Alara continued, her voice still easy and conversational, as if they were discussing weather. "I appreciate the generosity, truly. But I want to be equally honest with you, Commander." She met his eyes. "Your fleet will not last 3 seconds once we decide to stop being polite." The room went very still. Kar Zethul stared at her for a long moment. Then he said, "Explain yourself." And Alara reached into her jacket, took out her datapad, and set it open on the table in front of her. "I'd be happy to," she said. Karzethel did not say anything for a moment. He looked at the datapad sitting on the table, the way a man might look at a spider that had appeared on his dinner plate. Not afraid exactly, but not sure what to make of it yet. Alara did not wait for him to respond. She turned the datapad so its screen faced the room and tapped the first file. "You have been watching Earth for 43 years, she said. "We found the first deep space observation relay 7 years ago. We found 11 more after that. We did not destroy them." She looked at Karzethel. "We watched you watch us, and we learned a great deal." The room was very quiet. "What you saw when you watched us," she continued, "was war, conflict, division, countries fighting each other, systems failing, disasters we created for ourselves. You saw a species that could not stop hurting itself. And you made a calculation, a reasonable one, from your perspective. A species this divided, this chaotic, this focused on its own small problems, cannot organize against a threat from outside. It will crumble." She paused. "You were watching the wrong thing." She tapped the second file. Numbers appeared on the datapad screen, but she did not look at them. She already knew them. "In the 6 hours since your ultimatum was broadcast, the governments of Earth did something you did not predict. They stopped arguing." She let that sit for a second. "Every major military power on Earth has, in the past 6 hours, transferred command authority to a single coordinated response system. All nuclear and kinetic launch capability, every warhead, every railgun satellite, every long-range weapon we have, has been dispersed into deep space along pre-calculated trajectories. Automated, untraceable, dead-man systems that do not require a living operator to fire." She tapped to the next file. 42 of those trajectories, she said, point at Vreth home systems. There was a sound in the room, not a word, more like the sound of a large, confident thing becoming slightly less confident. Karzethel's wide mouth opened slightly, then closed. "You are bluffing," he said, but the word came out slower than his previous words. "You can check," Alara said pleasantly. "Your sensors should be showing a lot of small objects leaving Earth's orbit right now, on irregular courses. They are not weapons. They are the delivery systems for weapons. The weapons left an hour ago." "How are your readings?" There was a moment of silence. Then one of the officers near the wall spoke to Karzethel in rapid Vreth speech. The translator in Alara's ear caught fragments. "Confirmed dispersal, multiple trajectories, unable to track all. Origin, Earth." Karzethel looked back at Alara. Something had changed in his eyes. Not fear, not yet, but recalculation. She could see it. He was a smart commander. That was actually useful right now. "That is one weapon," he said. "A last resort. A dying strike." "Yes," she agreed, "but I haven't finished yet." She moved to the next file. "Project Scar," she said. "This was classified above the level of most of our own generals until 4 hours ago, when the people running it decided the situation had changed." She turned the datapad so its camera faced the main display screen on the wall behind her, and an image appeared on it, a feed from deep space, date-stamped 6 months ago. It showed an asteroid, a large one, roughly 3 kilometers across, drifting in the belt between Mars and Jupiter. Then it did not show an asteroid. The asteroid simply ceased to exist, not exploded, no debris, no shockwave, no flash. It was there, and then it was not there. The space where it had been was empty, as if it had never existed at all. The room changed again. Alara could feel it, the way the air in a room changes when people stop being sure of themselves. "Gravitational resonance disruption," she said. "We have been working on it for 11 years. It does not use energy in the conventional sense. It does not fire a beam or launch a projectile. It finds the specific resonance frequency of a mass, any mass, and cancels it. The result is what you just saw." She looked at Karzethel. "We have 19 such platforms in orbit. We tested one, once, 6 months ago, on a piece of rock with no one on it. She did not need to say the next part, but she said it anyway, clearly and quietly, because clarity mattered. Your ships have mass, she said. Zethel was very still now. The officers around the room were also very still. The chamber, which had been built to intimidate visitors into submission, had become a different kind of room entirely. One in which the people who lived there were doing rapid and unhappy mathematics. And finally, Elara said, moving to the last file, there is this. The new image on the wall screen was a schematic. It showed the Vreth flagship from the outside, accurate, detailed, updated within the last 4 hours. In the time since your fleet entered Earth's orbit, she said, our AI lattice drones, each one smaller than a grain of rice, each one capable of transmitting and receiving on frequencies your sensors are not designed to detect, have mapped every primary system on every ship in your fleet. Engines, life support, weapons controls, navigation, communications. She looked up from the datapad. They have not just mapped these systems, they have introduced themselves. Zethel turned to the nearest officer and spoke quickly. The officer moved to a console, pressed something, pressed it again, pressed it a third time, faster, and then turned back with an expression that the translator flagged simply as negative result. The flagship's weapon systems were not responding. Your fleet, Elara said calmly, is not a hammer pointed at us. It is a guest in a house whose locks we changed while you were making speeches. She straightened slightly. We did not do any of this to threaten you, Commander. We did it because we wanted this conversation to happen in a room where the facts were visible to both sides. Zethel stood up from his chair. He was enormous standing, nearly 12 feet tall, with all 8 limbs extended. He was trying to fill the room with himself, trying to remember that he was the larger thing here. They were working very hard. You cannot have prepared all of this, he said, in 6 hours. We didn't, Elara said. We prepared it in 6 years. The 6 hours were just for telling you about it. She closed the datapad. We have been waiting for someone to give us a reason to explain ourselves. You gave us 3 days. We only needed 1 meeting. The silence in the chambers stretched long and thin. Then Zethel said, very quietly, What do you want? And Elara said, I want you to go home. She said it, the way you would say something simple and final to someone who had finally understood the situation. Not unkind, not triumphant, just clear. Go home, she said. Tell your Dominion that Earth is occupied, not by your forces, by its own. Tell them the numbers don't work. Tell them whatever you need to tell them, but leave, today, and don't come back. Zethel stared at her for a long moment. Then he raised one large hand toward the weapons officer. Elara watched him do it. She did not move. Everyone in the room saw Zethel raise his hand. It was not toward the drones. It was not toward the navigation systems or the communication array. It was toward a panel on the far wall, old, mechanical, physical, connected by thick cables directly to a single weapon that the Vreth called, in their own language, something that translated roughly as the last word. A planet cracker. Old technology, pre-digital, not connected to any network, not hackable, not mapped by any drone smaller than a grain of rice, because it had no digital systems to find. Just wires, just metal, just a weapon so old and so direct that it operated on the same principle as a hammer. You aimed it, and you pressed the button, and it fired. His hand moved toward the trigger panel. And in the moment between his hand rising and his fingers reaching the panel, Elara said nothing. She did not shout. She did not run. She stood exactly where she was, with her hands at her sides, and she watched. Back on Earth, in the Deep Space Monitoring Station outside Geneva, 37 people watched the same moment on sensor feeds. Some of them closed their eyes. One of them grabbed the arm of the person next to her. Nobody breathed. The planet cracker fired. The beam was visible to the naked eye from the surface of Earth, a white line drawn from the sky to the planet below, fast and straight and bright as a second sun. It hit the upper atmosphere over the Pacific, exactly where it had been aimed, at the dense urban coast of North America. Every sensor on Earth screamed. Every alarm triggered. The noise inside the monitoring station was like the inside of a bell being struck. And then, nothing happened. The beam bent. Not slowly, instantly, completely, without a single degree of hesitation. What had been a straight white line became a curve, a great sweeping arc that bent west and then north and then up, away from the atmosphere, away from the cities, away from everything, and then continued on into deep space in a direction that would take it approximately 40,000 years to reach anything worth hitting. The room in the monitoring station was silent for 3 seconds. Then someone started crying. Then someone else started laughing. And then everyone was doing both at the same time, which is what human beings do when something impossible turns out to be fine. In the War Council chamber aboard the flagship, Karzethel stared at the sensor feed, showing the bent beam disappearing into open space. His hand was still on the panel. His 8 limbs were all very still. His pale gold eyes were fixed on the display screen, with an expression that had no good translation in any human language. Something between rage and a kind of deep, cold fear, and something underneath both of those that might have been the beginning of understanding. Alara glanced at the display. Then she looked back at him. "That was 3 seconds," she said. "You're already behind schedule." Her voice was still calm. It was not mocking. It was just accurate. Karzethel slowly took his hand away from the panel. He turned to look at her, and for a moment he just looked. At this small, quiet, unremarkable human woman standing in the center of his war chamber, who had come here alone, who had sat down without being told to, who had smiled when she should have begged, and who was still standing here after he had tried to end her world. "What is that?" he said, pointing at the display where the beam had curved. "A gravitational lens array," Alara said, "installed in Earth's orbital shell over the last 3 months. We funded it in part with the observation fees we have been quietly charging your scout ships for using our solar system without a permit." She kept her expression professional. "The receipts are in the datapad, if you want them." Something moved across Karzethel's face. If he had been human, you might have called it the look a person gets when they realize they have been completely and thoroughly outplayed, not just today, but for a long time, and that the game they thought they were winning was a different game entirely. On the human fleet, sitting in its small, honest formation 50,000 kilometers away, Admiral Chen Li stood on the bridge and watched the sensor feeds with her hands behind her back. Beside her, her youngest officer, Lieutenant Hassan, 26 years old, only 2 months out of the academy, was staring at the data with very wide eyes. "Admiral," he said quietly, "did we really have all that ready? The SCAR platforms, the Dead Man relays, the drones on their ships, all of it?" Chen looked at the feeds for a moment. Then she said, "About 60% of what Voss told them was real." Hassan turned to look at her. "And the other 40% was very convincing," Chen said. Hassan opened his mouth, closed it, opened it again. "She bluffed them?" "She gave them a picture," Chen said, "a picture with some things real and some things not, arranged in such a way that they couldn't tell which was which without testing it. And they tested the one part that was real, the lens array, and it worked, which means every part of the picture felt real." She paused. "That is not lying, Lieutenant. That is strategy." Hassan thought about this. What if they had tested a part that wasn't real? "Then we would have had a very different conversation," Chen said. But she bet on which test they would run, and she was right. She looked out at the alien fleet, hanging in the darkness. "That's why she's up there, and we're down here." Back on the flagship, Karzethel was very quiet for a long time. The officers around the chamber had not moved. Nobody spoke. The only sound was the low hum of the ship's systems, which were, notably, still not responding to Vreth commands in several key areas. When he finally spoke, his voice was lower than it had been before. "If we leave," he said slowly, "and report back to the Dominion, What stops them from sending a larger force? Nothing, Elara said honestly. But the picture would be the same. Larger force, same problem. And next time we would not have this conversation first. Next time the lens array bends the beam back toward the source. She let that land. We would rather not do that, but we are capable of it. Zethel was quiet again. You are a very strange species, he said finally. We are, Elara agreed. We have been told that before. There was another long pause. Then he said very carefully, like a man walking on ice he is not sure about. We will withdraw to the outer system boundary while I consult with the Dominion Command. It was not a yes. It was not quite a no either. It was the first step of something retreating that has not yet decided how fast to retreat. Elara nodded. That seems reasonable, she said. I will stay aboard for the duration, in case there are questions. It was the kind of thing only someone very calm, or very certain, would offer to do. Zethel looked at her for one final moment. Are you not afraid? He asked. And for the first time, the question sounded sincere. Not a taunt, just honest curiosity, from a creature that had spent its life making other things afraid, and had never quite encountered something that used fear differently. Elara thought about it for a second. Yes, she said. But I was afraid when I got on the shuttle too. And I got on the shuttle anyway. She picked up her datapad from the table. Fear is just information, Commander. You listen to it, and then you decide what to do with it. Zethel had no answer for that. Outside the ship, the fleet began, slowly, quietly, without announcement, to move. The Vreth fleet did not leave quickly. It moved the way large, proud things move when they are changing direction. Slowly, with great care, as if trying to make the movement look like a decision rather than a retreat. The 1,400 ships took 4 hours to pull back from Earth's orbit and begin the long journey toward the outer system boundary. They did not fire another shot. They did not broadcast another message. They simply moved, and the shadow they had cast over the Pacific Ocean lifted, and the stars came back. People on the beaches stood and watched them go. Nobody cheered. It did not feel like the kind of moment you cheer at. It felt like something far more complicated than that. Like the moment after a very close call, when you understand, fully and completely, how close it actually was. Elara spent 2 more days aboard the flagship. She ate the food they gave her, which tasted like nothing she had a word for. She slept in the quarters they assigned to her, which were large and cold, and smelled of metal and something older. She answered questions, patient, careful, detailed questions from Vreth officers who were trying to understand what had happened and how. She was honest with most of her answers, not all of them, but most. When the shuttle finally took her back to Earth, she sat in the front seat again and looked out the window. The planet below was the same as it had always been, blue and white and turning slowly. But the sky above it looked different now. Not frightening, not safe exactly, just different. Wider, more full of things. She was met at the landing pad by the Secretary General and a small group of people who looked like they hadn't slept in 3 days. General Webb shook her hand. He had very large hands, and he shook hers firmly, which she appreciated. How much of it was real? He asked quietly, after the formal greetings were done. Elara thought about how to answer that. Enough, she said. He nodded slowly. The SCAR platforms? 4 of the 19 claimed were actual. The rest were fabricated test signatures. She paused. The drones were real. The lens array was real. The dead man relay system was real. The asteroid footage was real, but 6 months old and we only ran it once. Webb let out a long breath. And if he had called the bluff on the SCAR platforms? He didn't, Elara said, because the lens array worked, and once one thing works you stop testing the others. You assume. She looked at him steadily. People stop checking the box once the first box checks out, even generals. Webb was quiet for a moment. That's a terrifying way to defend a planet. Yes, she agreed. We should probably build the other 15 SCAR platforms. He almost smiled. Already started. The official testimony before the UN Security Council took 3 days. Alara answered every question they had, clearly and thoroughly, and when they asked what Earth should do next, she said the same thing each time: build, prepare, and don't wait for the next fleet to arrive before deciding who you are. Nobody had a good argument against that. A week after the Vreth fleet crossed the outer boundary of the solar system and disappeared into deep space, the first report came back from the long-range listening stations. The Vreth were talking to their Dominion command. The analysts couldn't translate everything, but they got the shape of it. A report being filed, a recommendation being made, a series of very long silences on the Dominion's end that the analysts said they had never seen before. 3 days after that, a new signal was detected. Not from the Vreth, from a different direction entirely, from a system 400 light-years away, from a species the databases listed as the Sereth Pact, a collective of 7 civilizations that had been, until very recently, completely uninterested in Earth. The signal was short. Translated, it came to 6 words: "We would like to meet, peacefully." It was an extraordinary message. In 400 years of deep space communication, no alien civilization had ever sent those particular 6 words to Earth unprompted. The analysts read it 17 times to make sure they had it right. Dr. Okafor brought it to Ilara in her office, where Ilara was sitting at her desk with a cup of tea that was this time actually hot. "They want to meet us," Okafor said, setting the translation on the desk. "They saw what happened with the Vreth." Ilara read the message. Then she set it down and looked out the window at the city beyond. Ordinary buildings, ordinary streets, ordinary people going about their ordinary days under a sky that was for now quiet. "What are they afraid of?" Ilara asked. Okafor blinked. "I'm sorry? The Sereth Pact. If they're reaching out now, after watching us face the Vreth, they're feeling something. What is it?" She turned from the window. "Fear? Curiosity? Are they looking for an ally, or are they trying to find out if we're a threat?" Okafor thought about it. "We don't know yet." "Then that's the first thing we find out," Ilara said. "Before we respond, before we do anything, we find out what they're afraid of and what they want, and then we decide how to answer." She picked up her tea. Every conversation is a negotiation. The question is always, what does the other side need? Okafor nodded slowly. "Should I tell them you'll lead the delegation?" Ilara looked at her for a moment. Then she looked back out the window at the city, at the ordinary streets and the quiet sky, at the world that had made it through something it nearly hadn't. "Yes," she said. Outside, the afternoon was clear, and the sun was bright, and somewhere above it, past the blue, past the dark, the universe was still working out what to do about a small blue planet that had surprised it. The listening stations picked up more signals in the weeks that followed. Not threats, questions, requests, names of species that had sent 1 line, 2 lines, a cautious hello from very far away. The word was spreading through the galaxy the way all important words spread, quietly at first, then faster, then everywhere at once. The message was simple. The humans had faced the Vreth Dominion, 1,400 ships against 83, and the Vreth had left. Not defeated in battle, not by some miraculous weapon, but by something stranger and harder to fight. The humans had thought farther ahead. They had prepared while everyone else was still deciding whether to worry. They had built the answer before the question was asked. And when the moment came, they had sent 1 person with a datapad, and a calm voice, and a smile that turned out to mean something very different from what it looked like. In the war rooms and council chambers of a dozen different civilizations, commanders and leaders and strategists looked at the data and came to the same conclusion. Fighting the humans was not simply a matter of more ships or better weapons. It was a matter of knowing where the trap was. And nobody knew where the trap was. Which meant the trap could be anywhere. Which meant the trap was everywhere. Which meant you did not fight them at all. 6 months after the Vreth fleet retreated, Ilara sat at her office window late at night, the city dark and quiet below her, the sky full of stars. She was reading a new report. Another species, another tentative signal, another question from very far away. She put the report down and looked up at the sky for a long moment. The stars looked the same as they always had, but they were watching differently now. She picked up her tea, found it had gone cold again, and set it back down. The universe had given Earth 3 days to die. Earth had taken 3 seconds to change the question entirely. And now, out in the dark between the stars, something new was beginning to form. Not peace exactly, not yet, but the first careful shape of something that might become it, built on a foundation that no one had expected. The knowledge that humans were patient, that they planned, that they smiled when they should be afraid. And that smiling, that particular kind of smile, was the most dangerous thing in the galaxy.